Hey everybody, John Lorden here. Welcome to the last episode of Brainscratch for the year 2017. I want to give a very big thank you to Christy Straciner for helping me throughout this whole year and for getting me kickstarted on today's topic in terms of research. You're always a wonderful help to me, Christy. Thank you so much. Also, just a quick reminder, I will be off next week. No videos at all next week, so don't worry, but I'll be back the following week, starting on Monday, for the whole new year. I hope every one of you out there will enjoy the holiday season, be safe, but have a lot of fun during your New Year celebrations, and I'll see you on the other side of all that. But for right now, we have to crack into a very compelling mystery. And let me just start by asking, do you have a neighbor, maybe someone that lives on your street, older woman, a lot of cats, maybe keeps to herself, you don't really talk to her? This is a story that's going to make you think twice about having that type of relationship with neighbors like that. This is the story of Mary Cerruti. And here's a picture of Mary Cerruti. This actually starts almost like a Brainscratch searchlight. This is a woman that went missing when she was 61 years old, somewhere around February or March of 2015. But there's some very interesting developments that have happened since then that we have to go through. So starting with, first of all, there is a NamUs profile on her. I will have that in the description box below. Technically, she is still a missing person, but you're going to very quickly find out that the likelihood that she's been discovered is actually fairly high. There's just some technical hoops we have to get through before verifying that. Starting with Houston Chronicle, and I want to give a very big thank you to Emily Foxhall, who I've seen. She has authored, I think, more than half of the articles that we're going to be reviewing here. It seems to me that Emily really took this upon herself to get a very deep understanding of this case. I appreciate good journalism like that. I think she did a really good job in this case. We can see this article is titled March 5th, 2017. Let's get the start of what's going on with this mystery. No one knew what happened to 61-year-old Mary Cerruti. The lawn of her West Heights bungalow grew wild, and just in case you didn't notice, this is in Houston, Texas. That's why we're reading the Houston Chronicle. A window broke. Mail piled up. The signs of her disappearance troubled neighbors who had rallied behind her as a holdout against a massive new apartment complex that had gobbled up much of the surrounding property. As a matter of fact, I want to show you guys something interesting. I don't know if you know this about Google Street View, but you can actually select the dates that you're looking at. And this is Mary's house. Kind of hard to see behind all the trees and shrubbery around it. But if you look to the left of Mary's house, you can see, a little bit of an industrial building, but pretty much just a very simple looking neighborhood. However, if we change this view, let's knock it forward. This is in 2007. We're now going to 2011. We can see Mary's house. Looks like it has some nice yellow paint on it. We've still got that building to the left. Let's go ahead and bump to 2013. Still has the building. Neighborhood looks okay, but it's changing slightly. Changing very slightly. However, here on this next one, we jump to 2015 and you can see very drastic change. The houses that were down here are gone. The big industrial building gone, and in its place, a giant apartment building is being built at this time. This was June of 2015. And if we go ahead and do one last jump forward to February of 2017, we can see Mary's house with the apartment building completed, as well as apartments behind her home, as well as a section of townhomes beside her. It is literally like the neighborhood was just growing up around this one little house and blocking all of the amazing views that it had, all of the wilderness that you could see before. And we can see even here that at this time that this photo was taken, the house was actually for lease. And this is in February of 2017. Keep that in mind. It's kind of important in terms of the story as we roll forward. And keep in mind, this article is written in March of 2017. So literally a month after that photo. In 2015, a bank was cleared to foreclose on her home. Police issued a missing persons report 3 days later. Only when the new residents started moving in this weekend, this is March 2017, did a startling possible clue surface. I would say it's probably more than a clue. In a gap in the wall, the new residents found a pair of red eyeglasses, like the type Cerruti once wore, and a jumble of human bones. Yeah. Cerruti bought the home on Alston Street around 2001. It wasn't until late 2012 that concern grew over plans for a luxury apartment complex to be built around her property. Neighbors described Cerruti as a shy, kind, and frail woman who seemed older than she really was. In the years that followed, Cerruti faced the trials of a development rising all around her, quite literally, that the photos just kind of blow me away. Her water got cut off. Her car was blocked in the driveway. Construction made getting to her house more difficult. It's not clear when exactly Cerruti disappeared. In February, she had sent a Valentine to a friend. This is February of 2015. Each imagined theories for what had happened. Had she been murdered? Committed to a mental institution, decided to hide out of embarrassment because she had sold her property to the developer after all? A lot of very interesting theories. I think this is as close as I can get to when she was last in contact with someone. This note about in February that she sent a Valentine to a friend. I've seen multiple references to in either February or March of 2015. That's the last time that anyone had contact with her. So I think it might be this Valentine that is getting us that time frame. The new residents on Saturday shifted a board in the attic, peered down inside a wall, and saw the remains. Houston Police Detective Jason Fay said it's possible the person tripped in the attic and fell into the empty space. Now, something I'm really curious about is the way this is described. The new residents shifted a board in the attic and peered down into the wall to see the remains. I have to tell you, I am seeing all kinds of discrepancies on these articles about how these remains are found. Some of them are saying more that it was like the remains were found in a ceiling. Kind of reminds us of that teleportation episode I had a month or two ago. But I believe that the Houston Chronicle has the best information from what I can see. They're describing it more like you have to be in the attic, but you're looking down from the attic into the gap that is in a wall. And we'll get much better detail in a later article that they've also provided on this. But just know that if you look into this case, you're going to hear all kinds of different versions of this story. What's interesting here is shifted a board is not a great description. Was the board in place? Because if the board was in place, the likelihood that this was an accident gets minimized a bit. I don't think it gets completely wiped out, and I'll tell you why. But if she fell down this area and the board somehow landed perfectly on top to obscure her down there, I find that extremely difficult to believe. What we did have happen is some construction happened in this house between when she owned it and those new renters were in there. There was at least new windows put in and a new roof was done. And of course, if they were working on the roof, I'm sure some of them were accessing the attic. Could someone have seen that, hey, there was a board out of place and kind of moved it over and covered up where those remains possibly were? I think we have to consider that. So the likelihood that this could be accidental, I think we have to also keep in consideration, but pretty interesting that this is a woman that was standing up to this redevelopment happening in her neighborhood, and within a matter of a year or two from when that development goes up, all of a sudden she's missing. Very, very strange, and the story continues to get strange. Let's move ahead to abc13.com. When renters found the body in March, they called authorities and they moved out a short time later. Boy, I think that's a good idea. I would probably do the same thing. The skeleton was in a crawl space between the boards on the attic floor and the sheetrock on the ceiling. I don't think that's accurate, but I just want to point it out to you guys. We'll have a much different description later. All that was found was, quote, just bones, said HPD homicide detective Jason Fay. There was some tattered cloth, but not sure it was just scraps drug in by wild animals. Another thing that's interesting, if she was in there and you're talking about a matter of only a couple of years, I would assume that if this was accidental, she was probably clothed. I can't imagine she was crawling up in her attic without any clothing and then fell into this position. So I'm a bit curious about that they're only finding some tattered cloth in there. And if this is Mary, she's only been in there for a matter of a couple of years. So shouldn't that clothing be a bit more together than just tattered cloth? I don't know. Cerruti's ex-husband, David Cerruti, said they divorced 25 years ago. He was notified when she was reported missing, but hasn't received any news since then. Cerruti was an only child with few close family members. According to a neighbor, Cerruti kept to herself and surrounded herself with several cats. The neighbor said police went inside Cerruti's house and found all of her cats dead, but never found her. The house sat empty until the new tenants moved in and found these remains. Moving forward, back to a different article at Houston Chronicle, once again written by Emily Foxhall, this one in April of 2017. Mary Cerruti left behind her own self-portrait in dozens of annotated photographs developed at Walgreens. And in this picture in particular, you can see Mary's shadow actually in the picture. I have to highly recommend this video. I really think you guys should check it out. Essentially, she left a bunch of photographs. She wrote notes on the back of the photographs. And I believe Emily is actually reading the things that she had written on the photographs as they're showing the photographs. Just kind of a real moving tribute in a way to what she was going through. We'll get some more detail as we go into this article here, but I really enjoyed the respect and approach of this video. I think you guys will too, so you might want to check this out. Whether Cerruti intended for others to see them is anyone's guess. A realtor bought her Houston Heights home at a foreclosure auction in late 2015. Then he offered everything inside, trash, he called it, for sale. I just have to say, this is already a pretty sad story from my perspective. You know, she's fighting kind of this real estate empire that's moving in around her and destroying the neighborhood that she appreciated. And ultimately to learn that it's a realtor that winds up buying her place, clearing it all out, and then, you know, turning around and renting it to people. It's a really tough ending for a very, very tough story. Shocked that a missing person's belongings could be sold, neighbor Elizabeth Stein went to see what she might save. She found the photos, which the realtor said she could take. Stein, I don't know if she kept all the photos. We're going to see an update where someone else has some of these photos as well. Printed in 2013 and 2014, the images focus on two topics: her cats, who brought her joy at home, and the gentrification of her neighborhood, which infuriated her. And they also have a slideshow down here. There's 105 images, so obviously we can't go through them all on this video, but this is a decent idea of the collage and what these videos are like. You've got pictures of her cats, pictures of her home, pictures looking out her window at the construction that's going on. On the back, she's writing things like beep, 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 because she's hearing all these noises, like starting at 6:30 in the morning, just construction noises constantly. Very touching, and you know, gives you some insight into what her perspective was as she was going through this. I mean, here's the view from her window as the land was being developed. Cerruti had refused to sell, but she wrote that the bulldozers and backhoes made her wish she had moved, even if the developer made what she considered very poor offers. In the photos, felines blend in everywhere. 8 cats is way too many cats, Cerruti wrote. Later, when Cerruti went missing, 6 were reported dead. There is also this time frame that's here. I don't want to quite necessarily go into all of it, but it's literally her life, like from birth through 2 marriages, where she lived, what school she went to, and all that. So there's a lot more to crack into if you want to take a look into this case. I'm not covering it here because this isn't a typical missing persons investigation. Otherwise, it would be on Searchlight. And this type of information isn't in my perspective, at least from where I'm sitting right now, this type of information isn't going to help us understand this mystery anymore. It does give us some context into her as a person, but considering that I think the likelihood is that we've already found her, that likelihood is extremely high, this information can't really help us deduce, where she might have gone if she left of her own accord, or what things she had in her life or she had done in her life that might have caused something to happen to her. It's not that kind of conversation. So I kind of question how useful covering that footage is, or covering that information with you guys is, for this video in particular. But if you're interested in it, it's there. And just like everything else that Houston Chronicle is doing, that Emily Foxhall is working on, it's really well done, and a ton of additional information. Jumping over to khou.com. Roxanne Davis, a neighbor, has been holding on to some of Cerruti's personal photos ever since. So I don't know if Stein gave them to Roxanne Davis, or if Roxanne Davis just got some of them somehow, but her photos are apparently being handled by a few people. She was basically documenting her life in terms of how the apartment building was affecting her. The construction, the ongoing noise, what was being taken away from the neighborhood, what was being put in its place. Autopsy results will eventually reveal if there was any foul play. I kind of wish that was more true than it might actually turn out to be in this case. Keep in mind, what they largely found was just bones, but it's frustrating. It's been a long wait since the skeletal remains were found in her house. I'm hoping the DNA results will come back soon so we can have closure, Davis said. I want people to understand she was a human being. She had a nice life. She didn't deserve to go out as a missing person. And I can certainly understand the feeling that she's having about that. Back to Houston Chronicle, June 15th, 2017. The Harris County Institute of Forensic Sciences has released their findings. Could be good, maybe not. Cause and manner of death, undetermined. DNA results on the skeletal remains are still pending. At least one tooth was sent to the DNA lab at the University of North Texas, which coincidentally, that's where NamUs is. And I know some people at NamUs, so maybe by the end of this video, I'll be able to share some more info with you about that. Skeletal remains often reveal little on matter of death. Forensic Institute spokeswoman Tricia Bentley said, wounds that didn't get passed into the bone or onto the bone would be hard to determine. That's what's really tough about this. If you're just talking about skeletal remains, unless it was a gunshot and the bullet happened to hit some of the bone, or a knife wound and the knife happened to inflict some damage on the bone, or a strangulation and one of the neck bones was damaged, it's not very easy to always determine cause of death just because you've actually found the remains, particularly when the remains are in that state. So cause of death at this point, undetermined. Still no new information on that. I couldn't find any update on that. That's more current than June of this year. Emily Foxhall at cron.com, June 28th, 2017. Some more details coming out from the autopsy information. Bones found in the wall of a Heights home in March are consistent with attributes of the homeowner who went missing several years ago. They possibly belong to a female adult of white ancestry over the age of 40. Outside of that, I'm pretty sure that they'd be able to determine the approximate height and possibly even build of this person. So to hear that the bones are consistent with Mary, once again, is just kind of upping the percentage that I think that this is indeed her body that has been found at this location. The one question I have, once again, is still those clothes. And it's interesting to not see any types of dating done with the bones. I don't know if there's some way if they could tell, how long those bones have been exposed or about when the person might have died, but we're not getting any type of information like that here. Skeletal remains found in the wall were about 82% complete, according to the autopsy. The distal ends of nearly all bones seem to have been gnawed by rodents or some other scavenger. Animals may have also been responsible for the missing bones. No acute trauma could be distinguished among the remains. Evidence existed only for a previous femur fracture in an advanced state of healing. So sounds like she possibly had broken a bone before. But once again, this is interesting information because if they had her medical records, they could potentially line up where the break was. If they had an x-ray of the actual break, I don't know if they can do a straight comparison with that compared to how it healed, but I think it could once again kind of point them in the general direction of, yes, this is the right bone. It was broken in about the right place and is now healed over. This is probably more than likely Mary. But of course, nowadays we all want DNA results for the best answer in these cases. An animal nest was received with the bones, as was torn red and black material that may have been clothing. Investigators also found 2 athletic shoes and a pair of eyeglasses. So it's interesting that there might be material that was clothing. Perhaps the rodents got to the clothing and shredded it for some reason. I don't know enough about what type of rodents we're talking about here to make that determination. The tenant who found the bones had used a fold-down ladder to access the attic. He noticed a broken floorboard and looked down to find the remains, according to investigator notes from the scene. What seemed to be a piece of the floorboard was also in the space. How the skeleton ended up there remains unanswered, and here I think is where we're getting the most reliable and best detail of what this space actually was that she was found in. The wall space measured about 2 feet wide between the sheetrock, according to the report. From the broken attic board to the floor of the wall space measured about 8 feet 10 inches. So that is not a crawl space for essentially a ceiling like we heard described on a previous article. That is literally in between the wall, in between the sheetrock that's on one side in one room and the sheetrock that's likely in another room. There's a gap in between. Somehow she wound up in this gap. Did she fall down there? Was she put down there? Those are the big questions. And ultimately, the biggest question is this indeed Mary? Back to khou.com. Mary was very bright, very creative. She had a sharp sense of humor and a unique outlook on life, said Chrissy Dickerson, owner of Casa Ramirez. Ramirez knew Cerruti for 15 years and was her former boss when she worked at her store located in the Heights. The store sells Mexican folk art. You know, when you live alone, you sometimes have a different outlook on life than you would if you were surrounded by people all the time, said Ramirez. And apparently, Mary was pretty artistic. There's some descriptions about her home. She had like a Pulp Fiction poster and a Reservoir Dogs poster and a lot of what sounds like Mexican folk art that was also around her home as well. A bit eclectic in her taste, I guess, is a way that some people might describe it. And her boss goes on in this article to just talk about that she's really hoping that an answer comes out in all of this soon so it can help her move forward from this as well. Jumping over to another article at khou.com, a very interesting point that I can't explain this, but neighbors say Cerruti's car remained in the driveway for about a year after she disappeared, but one day it was gone. Now, I'm wondering if maybe that had to do with the foreclosure process. If she disappears around February of 2015, the foreclosure, actually, we have a timeline down here, so this is a perfect time to discuss this. 2001, she buys the bungalow. 2013, she speaks up with her neighbors about the large apartment complex. They lose the battle. The complex goes up. August 2014, she stops paying her mortgage. February 2015 is when the missing person report is filed. So according to what this is saying, we would assume that somewhere around March of 2016 is probably when the vehicle disappeared. What's interesting about that is foreclosure proceedings don't start until July of 2016. How did that car disappear? Was it potentially stolen, maybe by someone else, completely unrelated? It's a really big question. I don't know where to go with it, but it's kind of odd to me. And seeing that the foreclosure proceedings hadn't even started until July, I think the likelihood that it was removed by someone working for the bank or in the bank's interest probably isn't very high. So I'd be curious if I was, an investigator on this case, I'd be very curious to contact the DMV to see if her vehicle ever changed ownership after that period, what its status is. Is it even registered? Has someone else registered it? I don't know. A lot of questions about that vehicle. Why does it disappear? Just to finish off the timeline, March 2017, human remains found in the attic. And then, of course, June of 2017, we hear that the cause of death is undetermined. And starting ending where we started, back at HoustonChronicle.com with more information by Emily Foxhall. This article in particular has a lot of information, once again, about Mary and her backstory. Kind of the same as the timeline information, but it's written out in a bit of an easier to read format. So if you are interested in learning more about Mary, you can also check out this article about it. The question remains unanswered. Are the human bones found in the wall of Mary Cerruti's home in the Heights actually hers? At this point, I think I could tell you guys. So I reached out to Todd Matthews at NamUs. He was actually quoted in one of the previous articles about this case. At the time that they interviewed him, he was talking about the backlog of DNA tests that they had and the fact that their budget had been cut. That has since changed. They don't have the budgeting issues that they did when that article was written. However, when I asked him specifically about this case, he did check on the file. He could see that they did receive at least samples from Mary's family. So they certainly have something to test her DNA against, but he didn't have an update for me specifically about, I believe it's a tooth that has been sent to them for DNA testing. He didn't know specifically about that or where that was in terms of status. And this is, we're talking about, she was discovered in March, coroner's information coming out in July. I mean, we're coming up on, in a couple months, it's going to be a year since her remains have been identified. So I'm very curious as to kind of what the holdup is with that DNA test. But if nothing else, we know that at least her family has contributed DNA and there's something ready to test that against. It's harder still to pull together a detailed narrative of her life. Her parents died early. She married at least twice. She battled financial and health issues as she held odd jobs along the way. Those close to her are guarded. A few fear she will be defined as a crazy cat lady because dead cats were found inside her home, and that would certainly be a shame. This is a woman that, despite the fact that she was so private, the people that she did interact with seemed to be very fond of her and care about her a lot. As a matter of fact, one of those people contributes to this article some more information that gives us some different considerations. This is a friend of hers who kind of admits that he thought his exact words are that she was a little bit troubled. That's as far as I'll go. She was troubled. But we get some specifics here. Those who knew her mentioned a variety of ailments, including suicidal tendencies, lupus, and migraines, which she was constantly trying to get treatment for. Very interesting to see suicidal tendencies in here. Could that be potentially part of the story? I don't know. Is she really going to try to put herself in a wall to hide from the world if she's doing something like that? Maybe. That's why I think it's kind of worth just pointing that out. I've also even considered the possibility that perhaps she was trying to help one of her cats. If she detected, heard that one of her cats was stuck in the wall, if maybe her cat had gone up into the attic and somehow gotten into the wall, something along those lines. But we're not hearing any mention of any cat remains being found there, which is kind of interesting considering that they feel like rodents were in there. I don't know. It also mentions something from her second husband, Roy Law Elliott, which is pretty interesting. After hearing that Mary had disappeared, Elliott went by her house. He looked inside. He saw her photo equipment. He saw dead cats, but the house didn't look ransacked. So if we're talking about the possibility that Mary was attacked in some way, possibly for the trouble that she had caused people, I was trying to figure out, just looking at the way that construction was done, there were probably, and how many levels they built up, they probably not that they lost a considerable amount of money, but they would have made a much more considerable amount of money if her house wasn't there, because that building could have been extended and you could have had essentially possibly 12 or even more families living in that same space with how many levels they were going up. So probably a pretty significant amount of money that wasn't able to be made because of her holding out in that area. But is that really enough for someone? I mean, especially after the fact, this building's already built, it's already up. Then someone's going to go and take care of her for being a pest or something. I don't know. I don't know how believable that is. Notice of the suit to foreclose on her house arrived in March 2015 when she had last been seen. Someone signed illegibly in receipt of that document. So that's interesting, because if the last contact that we hear from her is February when she sent someone a Valentine, here we have potentially contact with her. I mean, obviously they're sending this certified mail or something that is needs to be signed for her to receive it so that it gives them proof that she has received it. But the signature on it is illegible. Was it really her that received that letter? And then also thinking about the emotional ramifications of this, did that spin her into some type of depression? You know, she hadn't been able to make her house payments for a number of months up to that point. According to the person that took care of her lawns and stuff, she stopped calling him and having him come out, and things were getting crazy in terms of the exterior of the home. I don't know. I think there is some likelihood that she felt like she was going to lose her home, didn't know where she was going to go to next, or was possibly dealing with some ailment and too sick to continue working, maybe to make the money to pay for her home. I don't know. There's a lot of different possibilities that I see with this. All of them fairly sad. Of course, the worst would be if she was harmed in some way. I just don't know how feasible it is, but that's why it's a brain scratch. And this is where I turn it over to you guys so we can talk about it in the comments below. First of all, do you think I'm too quick to conclude that this is probably more than likely Mary that was actually discovered? I really wish we had the DNA tests back. We don't yet. When that changes, I will certainly keep you guys updated on that. But outside of that, are there other considerations that you see at play here, other things that might have happened? Have you heard of stories like this before or have some personal insight to give us? Please share it with us in the comment box below. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for an amazing year of brain scratches. I really appreciate each and every one of you out there that watches, and I will see you back in the new year, 2018. I'll see you there. Take care.